Been noticing on X for about the last 2 months, maybe 3 months, that there seems to be a very huge black-pilled community in terms of MAGA and Trump. And I'm wondering why so many. And I think part of it is that a lot of these people don't really have a sense of scope. Also, there are certain people who make content specifically for the point of getting clicks. And these are people who like to be black pill. There are people who like to be angry and they look for content that makes them angry. So therefore, people will put it out. People are much more reactive to emotional content than they are factual content. And there's also people out there who are outright saboteurs who seem to be their purpose is just to basically make everyone black pilled, angry, and mopey. So let's talk a little bit about scope. Understanding what MAGA is and what it isn't. MAGA is an attempt to shift from globalism to nationalism. Now, in many ways, it's not a nationalism in a way that we're used to or probably anything we've really seen in the world in the past. And I'll get into the why of it. Now, I actually heard a couple of posters who I actually like. So if they recognize who I'm talking about, I'm not dissing you, I'm dissing what you said, if that helps. Uh, I heard a lot of them freaking out on Venezuela, and there's good reason to, but they were calling it globalism. Well, the United States unilaterally attacking Venezuela is not anything remotely akin to globalism. I guarantee you that all the globalists uh, pooped themselves on the when that came about because um, first, the U.S. acting unilaterally isn't something they want them doing, and also Venezuela is fulfilling some globalist agenda in its original state. As it gets altered, not as much. So, what exactly is globalism? Globalism is when the United States basically becomes embedded in global organizations where the United States is equal amongst peers. Now, it ends up having some de facto leadership just because of its size, money, and military power, but it strives to be in the pack. That's globalism. What we did in Venezuela is called interventionism, which is completely, well, interventionism could be behalf of globalism, but in this case wasn't. So, what is nationalism? Well, nationalism isn't what a lot of people seem to believe it is. It doesn't necessarily mean that you've become isolationist. What nationalism means is the interest of the nation come first. And sometimes the interest of the nation, and I'm not agreeing with this, I'm just giving you a definition. Sometimes the interest of a nation do require military action abroad. So there's a big difference between globalism and nationalism there. So, what's isolationism? Well, I think there's a two-way to look at that. Isolationism traditionally has been a way of saying like the United States doesn't interact with anybody in any way, shape, or form. I think modern isolationists would like the United States to pretty much try to go it alone. Now, a go it alone nation could be a nationalist nation, or it might not be. So that gets us down to America first. A lot of people, and again, America first is a bit of a slogan. However, it isn't isolationist and it isn't go it aloneism like a lot of people seem to believe it is. I know a lot of people out there perceive, as Trump said, he would not get the United States involved in prolonged wars that have no benefit to the United States of America. Well, they interpreted that into hippie kumbaya peace drum circles, which is not what that's saying. What it's saying is we're not going to get involved long term. We're only going to get involved in things that are national interest as opposed to global interests. Again, not agreeing, explaining. So, just a little side note, what was occurring with Venezuela is uh, there's a lot of interaction uh, with Venezuela in terms of how they were doing things, essentially uh, drug running, clandestine oil running, et cetera, et cetera. They also kind of became a clearinghouse for black money, basically money flowing all over the place. And a lot of this money ends up being tied to global interests because it's a way for organizations to basically launder their money. Some of this money ends up in NGO and NGO like organizations that work against the United States. Other countries that were benefiting off the Venezuelan oil scheme were Iran and Russia because they were allowed to mix uh, their oil, which is embargoed, with Venezuela's oil, which hadn't been, and allowing them to sell their oil around the world. And also, Cuba was a net beneficiary because they were getting very cheap oil in exchange for providing security for the government. So, this is why that ties in. This is the logic that was being used on it. When we talk about a country like Iran, and the peace fags had a complete meltdown when we did the bombing of the nuclear facilities there. And yeah, I'm squeamish about doing that too because you never know. I mean, the people at the top are not policy geniuses, and you never know when they're going to basically drag us into a war. But I don't freak out in advance because no one can really predict what's going to happen. And if you basically run around screaming like a poof, you kind of look silly afterwards when it turns out you're wrong. So the best thing to do is say, well, this is deeply concerning. Let's see what happens. Well, I think a lot of what's going on with Iran, part of the being the bombing of the nuclear facilities, and now this kind of saber rattling going on with the protests, uh, they're basically trying to delegitimize the Iranian government because one of the big things that happens if Iran stops being the current state it is, the whole Gaza issue kind of disappears. There's literally nobody left to fund it. You basically have Qatar sitting in isolation at that point. They're probably going to feel really awkward about getting involved in things when Iran is no longer a major player, and the last major player in the Middle East is a Saudi Israeli relationship. So let's talk a little bit about the establishment and the scope of establishment. And major theme of a lot of my videos is what is the establishment? The establishment is pretty much everybody who has something to do with running the government. Some of these people, some of these positions are things you see out in the open, like what's delineated in the Constitution. A lot of it is below the surface. Organizations, think tanks, lobbyists, uh, other money sources, NGOs, etc., that weigh in on the impact of how things run. Now, with that in mind, you have to understand that MAGA is a minority within the establishment. Essentially, our establishment is globalist in nature, and that part of the establishment is a near majority. It's basically been building since World War II. Now, the thing that people have the hardest time of understanding, and this is why people are getting blackpilled, is okay, as I said, MAGA is the minority. The nationalists are a minority. The globalists are a near majority. So, in order to make anything work, you have to get with the fence sitters in between. These are the people who are neither globalist nor nationalist. They essentially have much smaller goals, and if they get paid off, they side with the party that's paid them off. Now, globalists, being a near majority, only need to peel off a small portion of the fence sitters to move their agenda. Because the nationalists, the MAGAs, are the minority, they need almost all the fence sitters to move their agenda forward. So, for every gain the nationalists, the MAGAs, make, they have to make a compromise trade off to the fence sitters in order to move that piece of agenda forward. So you have to understand that some of the MAGA agenda items are completely unacceptable to the fence sitters. Maybe just at this juncture, but since they are unacceptable, they're unobtainable right now because there's nobody to make a deal with and make them through. So it comes down to a matter of priority. The MAGA movement has to make priorities that are critical to moving their agenda forward so that either they become a near majority themselves or become an actual majority, or they can form a functional working coalition with the fence sitters to the future. And just to fully understand this whole establishment thing, when I talk about globalists, that's not all Democrats. There's a lot of Republicans that are globalists as well. Uh, there are very few Democrats that are nationalists, and what nationalists there are reside in the Republican Party pretty much as a minority. So, what should be the number one priority? Well, the number one priority has to be the economy. Understand, if MAGA got 100% of its agenda through and the economy tanks, they will lose at the midterms and everything will be for nothing. So, therefore, the economy must improve and people must actually perceive that it has improved. Because a lot of times you get macro indicators that show, okay, things are improving, but if the individual is going, I don't see it or I see very little of it, they don't get particularly enthused. Now, this is coupled with the fact that Trump is attempting to rejigger the economy from a globalist model to a nationalist model. He has to get this nationalist model working in some manner by the time the midterms roll around. This is tricky because economies don't like being moved around into into different focuses. Uh, so he is not in a position where his predecessors could just basically flush the system full of money and he basically gets the results he needs. It's not going to happen unless more of the things he's working on take hold. Another thing that's critical here is the Ukrainian Russian war. And this is economic in nature, something people have trouble grasping. Um, the Ukrainian Russian conflict is causing severe damage to the world economy as well as ours. It's suppressing things. If Trump can pull out a long term ceasefire or even a functional peace agreement, it's going to have massive impact on the economy. If he can pull that off before the midterms, it will help dramatically in those areas. Basically, shutting down the Ukraine Russian war has the potential of dropping the price of gasoline 30 to 80 cents per gallon. Now, not all of that was going to show up in regular, but a lot of that may show up in diesel, which is critical because we ship everything across the country with diesel, both trains and trucks. This also would end up dramatically lowering the price of natural gas and heating oil, which would improve everybody's improve everybody's pocketbook in the end. It also eliminates a large chunk of foreign aid. A lot of this foreign aid, specifically going to Ukraine, is being laundered in terms of kickbacks going back to individuals and organizations that are anti-MAGA. So by getting rid of this foreign aid, or at least curtailing the parts that are detrimental, because once the war is over, it's going to be a lot harder to defend this chunk of foreign aid, and getting defunding the people who are getting the kickbacks on our side will be very positive towards the economy. We could also see probably a 1% drop in the CPI by the ending of the war. Grain prices would probably drop between 10 and 20%. To put that into perspective, that doesn't just mean bread, it also means pretty much all animals as well, because large amounts of what they are fed is grain. Now, this may not sound good to US farmers, but the other thing that comes with it is Russia has been the major world supplier of fertilizer. Fertilizer could drop between 15 and 30%, which would offset the grain price drop to where we would still be competitive in terms of the world market. Now, one of the things that comes out of the whole economic picture is looking at the big beautiful budget. Now, that thing was a massive piece of crap, and it's not a desirable bill in itself, definitely when you look at the bottom line of it. What most people don't get is the reason why it costs so much is because that's what it costs to buy off the fence sitters. In order to get one part of the agenda through, we had to basically jack up the deficit and the debt in order to pay off the fence sitters to get the MAGA or nationalist part of the agenda through. So, the number two priority that has to be taken care of is that the voters have to turn out for the midterms. The critical voter in 2026 are the people who normally do not turn out for any other election than the president. These people tend to be low information voters. They vote on personality, urgency, and excitement. And it's going to take campaign effort, the likes we have never seen before, in order to turn them out. Okay, this is the critical part. Pay attention. These people have never turned out before for a non-presidential election, and we have to get them out this time if we expect any form of a good outcome in the midterms. So what's going to happen is you're going to see a lot of things as a libertarian that are very distasteful. The idea that we're probably going to get some kind of kickback checks in order to get people excited about voting probably will occur. You will see Trump really push his cheap government medication program. Is like, was it called Trump Care or something like that? I don't even remember what it's called. And here's something else. There can't be any major medical disruptions to our current system between now and the election. That's why the bozos went and extended Obamacare premiums. So this is what's going to be coming. That's why it's happening. The midterms have to have mass turnout in order to get decent effect. The number three priority is breaking the most critically funded NGOs. So there's a lot of the NGOs that have funding that's pretty much designed to stop everything MAGA is attempting to accomplish. A lot of this is actually coming directly from US tax sources, some of it private sources, some of it overseas. The amount of money is in the trillions. Some estimates are that even the organizations that have been completely defunded from government sources still have trillions of dollars in reserves. A lot of, because it's so pervasive, all of them, all the various NGOs and other organizations that are getting money are not all known. Their locations are not all known. Their sources of income are not all known. But a lot of the things they do is things like legal defense for immigrants and violent protesters. They provide training for protesters to basically escalate to the point where they basically drag the police in to overreacting. This money goes into over voter turnout, not the kind of voters that the Republicans want coming out. It deals in information warfare, which money is being used on our social media platforms to undermine critical messages, and it will pay for street riots if the other side deems them necessary this summer. So, in terms of the NGOs, we must prioritize what is critical versus what is possible. Here's the part that sucks. Some of those NGOs that are getting funded directly out of your tax money are protected by the fence sitters. It's their pot of money. So some of it we're going to have to deliberately ignore in order to get at some of the other ones. So therefore, that's what I'm talking about, prioritizing the critical versus the possible. First, you have to look at the things that are doing the most damage, and then you have to figure out if it can be eliminated and what you have to give up in order to eliminate it. What is your quid pro quo? The next priority is deportations. Now, I'm seeing a lot of stupid crap out there on X where people, oh, well, what Trump has done so far is not enough, or something ridiculous like, unless we get 100 million people deported, it's just, completely useless and nothing. Well, go back to my original statement about who's putting these kind of things out there. That's Blackpilled nonsense. Essentially, the Trump is deporting more people from in country than anybody has in a while. They are mixing numbers where they're, for instance, Obama on paper looks like he deported more than Trump did, but a lot of it comes down to they were counting people who were turned away at the border or self deported as deportations, whereas Trump is not getting the same metrics. So the big shows that are going on, basically arresting people, making it in the news, the big sweeps through the cities, part of it's in order to trigger self deportations because there's no way we can deport all the people who need to be deported out of this country. There's far too many of it. Another thing that comes out of these big raids in the big cities, and this is something I've talked about in other videos as well, is to disrupt organized crime. Organized crime can be anything like the mafia all the way down to gangs. In most big cities, the political machines of the big cities are in some way dependent on organized crime in order to either turn out the vote or get the vote to go the way they want. Disrupting organized crime basically makes it harder for the big city political machines to function. Also, what's going on is the idea that they're trying to reduce the voter base in blue states, either for the next census or a new census that might be commissioned. Right now, people are saying that they've deported enough people from Minnesota in order to cost it one of its electoral votes and a representative. Another reason for hitting the big cities is also to reduce the volunteer and donor manpower for the Democrat Party when the elections come up. A lot of illegal immigrants end up hired in under the table agreements in order to go ballot harvest and other various things that go along with getting the votes to the ballot box. The next priority has to be disrupting illicit sources of Democratic money. Now, part of this I mentioned before, it's organized crimes and gangs. Breaking up these gangs forces, basically makes the machine run a lot more wobbly than it would otherwise. Another thing that's in here is a lot of the fraud kickbacks do find their way into the NGOs and into the Democratic Party. There are also NGO sources that need to be targeted that will essentially help disrupt this money. And then there's donation laundering, where basically big organizations sit on a giant pile of money and then illegally enter people's names from across the country and donate on their behalf without them ever knowing it. These are things that are going to be part of that priority. The next thing is dealing with election integrity. Part of it is clearing the voter rolls. We're seeing a lot of that going on now, where lawsuits are going in place. And understand what the clearing the voter rolls is because what happens is if you just leave your voter rolls go, they'll just keep growing and growing and growing. And if you don't account for people who have died, people who have moved away, or people who just aren't voting, it opens up the capability of more fraud because then you have names in the database and you can go, and if nobody is there to challenge it because they're dead or gone, then somebody can basically submit a vote on their behalf and it's like, oh well, no one's going to challenge it because that person isn't around. So getting rid of or clearing the voter rolls of dead and moved voters cuts down on the ability to do vote fraud. Uh, Also, they're working on tightening the campaign windows so that basically campaign season doesn't run for 6 months before the election and a month after. And another move is to cripple or end mass mail in voting. Uh, Priority 7, election fraud prosecution. Now, one of the things people are all carping on X is about, well, why isn't so and so getting arrested? Why isn't this person being arrested? Anyways, essentially, they have to go after the cases most likely to result in a victory. You can't go arrest a bunch of people and then hope you have a case against them. The federal government always builds a solid case before they go after someone. So you have to go after people. And then here's the part that, again, sucks is some of the individuals that essentially MAGA really, really, really wants to see arrested are being protected by the fence sitters. The fence sitters have drawn a line saying certain people are off limits. If you go after these people, you don't get any deals from us. They also have to go after the cases that highlight laws or create opportunities for precedent. So you want to show you don't want to get someone for because you don't want to go after a high value name for a run of the mill procedural issue that doesn't clarify anything. You want to hit people who are going to basically highlight a law, the one that's critical that actually protects voter integrity, so that people know this is being enforced. So that gets us down to the last priority. Well, part of last priority is the Epstein files. In all honesty, okay, people hate to hear this, but there's nothing there. Okay, okay. If there were incriminating files out there, they've either been destroyed by the people they incriminate, or they're still under control of the people who created them, and they have no value once they're released out into the public. So all these tons and tons of files out there, a lot of them are red herrings. They aren't going to tell us a whole lot more than we already know. There's going to be a lot of hearsay in there where basically people are fingered, but there's not solid evidence to do anything about it. And in the end, basically a lot of lawyer time within the government is being used up to basically go through these files and send them out. In the end, they're not going to get us anything when these lawyers should be actually working on some of those other priorities I talked about. Also, last priority is COVID crimes not related to money laundering. I'm one of these people who would love to see Fauci end up in jail. However, the one thing he probably wasn't doing was money laundering. He was actually actionizing federal money for really bad things. Unfortunately, he may be one of the people who's protected by the fence sitters. Uh, so, COVID crimes that don't directly indicate money flow that ends up in Democratic coffers or NGOs that feed the Democratic coffers are low priority. Uh, and then things that deal with fraud and kickbacks that's outside the globalist money chutes. So there are certain money, not all fraud ends up in Democrats' hands. Some of it ends up in Republican hands. That kind of money is going to be ignored for obvious reasons. And there's also money out there that is relatively benign, where it's not doing nearly as much damage as others. That's going to get low priority. And ultimately, any money that ends up that's basically kickback and fraud money that's going directly to the fence sitters is also going to be ignored. So when you see people freaking out on X going, oh, look, here's this big chunk of money that was defrauded and they're not doing anything about it. Well, it could be because they can't, because they'll break what little coalition they have within the establishment, or alternately, they can't because it's not worth going after in terms of what the other things. The size of the amount of money being fraudulently spent is not as important as who's getting it and what it's used for. So, just to re-clarify, I don't agree with all these actions. I'm explaining them. And I'm not saying trust the plan. No. The plan is nebulous and hard to understand. I think it's important, if you see a problem, rather than getting blackpilled over it, or rather than going, I'm never voting for Trump again, whatever. The point is, you got to keep highlighting the problem. You say, hey, why aren't we doing something about this? And ultimately, if it's important enough, you might be able to get them to change your priority, or alternately, you may push them into a position where they have to explain why they're leaving this alone. Now, you're not going to get the full explanation, but you're going to get at least a, hey, we got bigger, more important things to go after. But that's how we push the conversation, is by uh, remembering that the scope of this problem is massive, and that our pet peeve isn't necessarily going to be the one that's more important to them. Yeah, there's certain people we'd really like to see go down, but if they're out of power and not drawing cash anymore, there's something there's something that either can wait for another day or another time. Now, will this succeed? That's really hard to say. This is something we haven't seen in our country. Really, this is probably going to be one of the most major attempts at a realignment of the establishment that we've ever seen. So the idea of how likely it's to succeed is completely unknown. We will only see that as it happens. And ultimately, one final thing, I am a libertarian. I don't necessarily like the direction everything's going, but as I've said before, if my choice is between uh, global totalitarianism from the left and uh, a weirdly undefined nationalism from the right, I'll take the latter, because the former we have already seen doesn't work. I'll give the latter a chance to fail before I freak out about it. All right. Comment below. Did I help clarify anything for you? Uh, did anything I say not make sense? Okay, I want to. Doing something a little bit different on my delivery. I switched from a script format to an outline format because I think I deliver better that way. But it also means I'll either miss stuff or occasionally mush mouth from one topic to another and not be clear. So if there's something that wasn't clear to you, just ask me in the comments below. Uh, please smash the like button. If you haven't, if you're not a subscriber, check out my other titles. You'll see that I get into a lot of different things. Uh, Please consider subscribing, and if you know someone who might find this interesting, please share it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.